The airplane's descent felt less like a landing and more like the end of a very long, tightly coiled spring, finally releasing its tension. 15 years. 15 years, 3 months, and 6 days, to be exact. Aisha Washington didn't tally the time out of nostalgic sentimentality, but with the cold, precise calculus of an accountant closing the books on a completed fiscal obligation. Every day was a line item, a necessary life expense paid for the sake of the only asset that truly mattered, her daughter Jillian's future. When the wheels kissed the damp asphalt at JFK, Aisha felt no trace of nervousness, only a profound, quiet sense of satisfaction. Mr. Lawrence Ellington, her billionaire employer with his demanding schedule, his 4 a.m. panic attacks and sudden demands for rare Ecuadorian orchids, was finally a distant echo, secure in his immaculate penthouse suite overlooking Lake Geneva. Her work, her obligation to maintain that chaotic life, was done. Her duty was fulfilled. Welcome to Betty's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. A slight shiver, not of anxiety, but of sharp anticipation, ran through her as she unbuckled her seatbelt. For a decade and a half, she had flawlessly managed someone else's volatile existence, their homes, their crises, their complex offshore finances. Now she was coming home to simply live, to settle into the quiet rhythm of a life lived next to her Jilly. The New York air, thick and humid after the crisp alpine coolness, smelled of melting snow and diesel exhaust, a familiar, native scent that felt like a cloak settling on her shoulders. Aisha hadn't warned anyone of her arrival. She craved the raw, unfiltered moment, the pure, childlike delight on Jilly's face, a look she had only been able to imagine while reading her daughter's short, somewhat restrained emails. "Mom, everything is wonderful. Trent takes such good care of me. We live in a huge, beautiful house outside the city. You would be so happy for us," Jilly had written. And Aisha had been happy. Every electronic missive was a justification for the sleepless nights, the missed holidays, and the birthdays where she could only send money and gifts via courier. She had missed Jilly's college graduation and her wedding. She had only seen her husband, Trent Thorne, in stiff professional photos. He looked tall, self-assured, and clearly descended from a reputable family. The name, Thorne, sounded heavy, solid, and utterly establishment. This was precisely the life she had sacrificed everything for. Stable, secure, and utterly unlike the fragile existence Aisha herself had known. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man whose tired eyes held the weariness of navigating endless city traffic, whistled softly when she gave him the address. "Whoa, ma'am, Greenwich, Connecticut? That's some serious zip code." Aisha offered only a polite, reserved smile. "Yes, it is." Her daughter deserved the best, the most serious kind of security. As the cab transitioned from the roaring expressways to the hushed, narrow lanes of the exclusive enclave, Aisha let herself picture Jilly. Perhaps she had gained a little happy weight, softened by the ease of privileged domesticity. Maybe they were expecting a child? The image warmed Aisha's chest. She would finally be a grandmother. She imagined walking a pristine stroller down these manicured lanes, past formidable mansions, making up for all the lost, empty years. The car finally halted before a set of elaborate wrought-iron gates, easily 3 times Aisha's height. Beyond them, the house loomed, massive, constructed of pale stone, topped with a dark slate roof and pierced by countless windows. It wasn't merely large, it was overwhelming, less a family home and more a monolithic fortress. "They won't let me pass the security booth," the driver noted, glancing nervously toward the heavily defended entrance. "You'll have to call ahead to get them to open up." Aisha paid the fare and stepped out, acutely aware of his curious gaze following her. He likely assumed she was expensive staff, perhaps a private nurse or an executive assistant, arriving for her duties. Her attire, the severe coat, the high-quality leather carry-on, was, after all, the quiet uniform of her demanding trade. She approached the separate pedestrian gate and pressed the call button. A melodic, silvery chime echoed momentarily through the silent, cold neighborhood, then faded into nothing. She waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. Silence. A flicker of deep unease stirred within her. Jilly knew her mother might call any time. Aisha pressed the button again, holding her breath. Still nothing. She rattled the gate handle. Unlocked. This was another oddity. Houses of this caliber were habitually triple-locked against the world. Aisha pushed the heavy iron door open. The sound was a harsh scrape against the gravel. She walked along the paved path toward the front entrance, a massive slab of dark wood featuring a shining brass handle. It was slightly ajar. Just a crack. A draft of cold, dense air and an unnerving silence seeped out from the opening. Her anxiety, previously a faint tremor, surged into a cold wave. Leaving her suitcase abandoned on the polished stone porch, Aisha carefully pushed the enormous door open. "Jilly?" Her voice sounded hollow and unsure in the vast space. The door swung silently inward, ushering her into an enormous, echoing foyer. The floors were white marble, the ceiling soared, vanishing into the heights of the second story, and a wide, winding staircase dominated the center, worthy of a palace. The air here was strangely cold, carrying a sharp, chemical scent of professional polish and bleach. The house was utterly silent. No television, no voices, no music. A deep, unnatural quiet that made her ears ring. "Jilly, it's me, Mom!" Aisha called, forcing more volume into her voice. The word Mom rebounded off the marble walls, echoing briefly before dissolving somewhere high above. And then she saw her. At the very far end of the immense foyer, nestled at the foot of the palatial staircase, a woman was kneeling. Her back was toward Aisha. She wore some kind of shapeless, soiled gray uniform, her hair tucked tightly under a simple scarf. She was scrubbing the thin lines of grout between the marble tiles with methodical, repetitive, utterly exhausted movements, wielding only a small, stiff brush. A deep chill pierced Aisha, originating not from the cold floor, but from an internal, icy dread. She couldn't see the woman's face. Yet something about the gaunt, bony curvature of the figure stopped Aisha's heart. She moved forward slowly, her expensive heels clicking loudly, each step echoing in the silence. Finally, she read the crude embroidery on the back of the dirty, greasy apron. Each word landed like a physical hammer blow against her temples. "Thorne family help." "No," Aisha whispered, the soundless exhale barely escaping her lips. The woman flinched violently at the sound and turned slowly, as if the effort required enormous reserves of strength. Time ceased to exist. It was Jillian. But this skeletal figure, draped in grayish skin, was a stranger. Her face was emaciated, her cheeks hollowed, dominated by huge, vacant eyes. And on her arms, running from her delicate wrists up to her elbows, were terrible, dark, ugly bruises. Some were almost black, distinctly shaped like fingers, suggesting someone had gripped her with monstrous, crushing force. The discovery was a shock that threatened to steal Aisha's sight. But the next second was infinitely worse. Jilly's eyes widened in recognition, but they offered no joy, no relief, no filial love, only a primal, raw, animal terror, the kind of fear a cornered, helpless creature registers when it suddenly faces the hunter. "Mom, no," Jilly hissed, a voice like the rustling of dry leaves. She frantically crawled toward her mother, clutching the hem of Aisha's cashmere coat. "You can't be here. They'll see you. Go, please go." Her plea was so desperate, so sincere, so focused on Aisha's safety that it momentarily stole the air from Aisha's lungs. Jilly was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for her mother. It was at this critical, agonizing moment that a cold, imperious female voice rang out from the top of the ostentatious staircase. "Who is that? And why is the help off the floor?" Aisha raised her head. There stood a woman in her late 60s, tall, impeccably dressed, with a stern, aristocratic face and an immaculate gray hairstyle. She did not look shocked or surprised. She looked severely annoyed, viewing Aisha as an uninvited interruption to a carefully orchestrated day. The woman surveyed Aisha with pure, crystalline disdain before addressing Jilly, who was frozen, huddled wretchedly at Aisha's feet. "Jillian, you will be punished for this." The single brutal word, punished, hung in the deafening silence of the marble hall. It failed to trigger maternal rage in Aisha, nor did it spark fear. Instead, it clicked like a circuit breaker, immediately cutting off all maternal sentiment, all pain, and engaging an emergency generator in her mind. 15 years spent in Geneva, navigating the egos and disasters of the ultra-rich, had trained Aisha for crisis. She had calmed operatic divas having nervous breakdowns 5 minutes before their curtain call. She had organized emergency helicopter evacuations for a financier suffering a heart attack on an icy ski slope. She had negotiated face-to-face with furious labor union leaders on behalf of a man who refused even to acknowledge their existence. The searing grief inside her condensed into a dense, heavy, cold stone lodged in the pit of her stomach. Her mind, however, became a surgical instrument, honed to a razor's edge, efficient and detached. She did not waste a glance on the woman dominating the staircase. Elara Thorne was unimportant, merely a factor to be managed, a problem to be solved. All of Aisha's surgical attention focused entirely on the trembling bundle at her feet, on her daughter. Aisha's voice was even and calm, the tone she used when issuing non-negotiable commands during a high-stakes crisis. "Jillian, stand up." Jilly looked up, her eyes huge and filled with terror, but she obeyed. Her body felt frighteningly weightless, like a bird's hollow bone structure. With minimal effort, Aisha helped her rise. Jilly swayed precariously, and Aisha steadied her, feeling the shocking sharpness of her shoulder blades jutting through the thin, gray fabric of the uniform. Without uttering a single word, Aisha unbuttoned her cashmere coat, the one she had purchased in Zurich with her first substantial bonus, imagining she would one day stroll with Jilly through a Manhattan park. She took it off and draped the expensive, warm fabric over her daughter's shaking shoulders. The coat instantly hid the pathetic apron with its humiliating inscription. Instantly, Jilly looked less like a beaten servant and more like a profoundly frightened, fragile teenager. "Who did this to your hands?" Aisha asked, her voice just as quiet, gazing down at the monstrous bruises. The question was not an accusation, but a simple statement of fact that needed to be recorded and logged. Behind her, Aisha heard the rustle of expensive fabric and the measured descent of heavy steps. Elara Thorne was coming down the stairs, every footfall radiating her ingrained awareness of her own overwhelming power in this house. "I am Elara Thorne," she announced in a tone of glacial ice, stopping just a few feet away from them. "You will immediately release my son's wife. She has obligations." Only then did Aisha turn, looking the older woman directly in her hard, unforgiving eyes. Aisha recognized the type instantly, women born with the unwavering conviction that the entire world was merely their personal estate, and everyone else was, by definition, the staff. Elara's face was flawlessly maintained, but hard, like a perfectly preserved death mask. "I am Aisha Washington, her mother," Aisha replied, articulating every syllable distinctly. Her gaze was as cold and unrelenting as Elara's. "You will show me her room, now." A fleeting, disorienting flash of surprise crossed Elara's aristocratic features. She had clearly braced herself for any reaction: tears, hysterics, pleading, or crude threats. She was utterly unprepared for a calm, non-negotiable command issued with the precise authority of a CEO. It was not the language people in her rarefied social circle used with someone like Aisha. That crucial second of hesitation was Aisha's first small, vital victory. Alara compressed her lips, her face hardening instantly with fury, but she complied, turning and walking silently deeper into the cavernous house. She led them past the enormous echoing foyer, not up the sweeping main staircase, but through a long, dim corridor. It smelled vaguely of yesterday's heavy soup from the adjacent gleaming kitchen. She then navigated them to a cramped, dark service staircase located at the very back of the house, the staff entrance. Climbing the squeaky utilitarian steps, Aisha tightened her protective grip on Jilly's shoulder. Jilly was shaking uncontrollably, entirely silent, clinging to her mother. The room was located in the attic. It was a small, pathetic closet with a dramatically sloping ceiling and one tiny, perpetually dust-filmed window tucked under the roofline. Inside, the furniture consisted only of a narrow iron bed covered by a thin gray blanket and a single, wobbly stool. There was no desk, no closet, no mirror. Not a single personal item, no photograph, no book. It was not a room. It was a glorified janitor's storage space where a human being was permitted to sleep. The air was stale and heavy with the dense odor of hopelessness. Alara stopped in the low doorway, crossing her arms with the casual air of a victor displaying a prize. "See, this is your daughter's assigned place." Again, Aisha calmly ignored the implied triumph. She carefully sat Jilly down on the iron bed. Only then did she pull her Swiss-issued smartphone from the inside pocket of her coat. In that miserable, dusty closet, the sleek, cold, efficient device looked like a defiant artifact from another world. Aisha's fingers moved across the screen with habitual speed. She was not searching for old friends or relatives. She opened a premium hotel booking application, the St. Regis, Presidential Suite. She chose a way-fake anonymous name, Anna Wolski. Payment was discreetly handled via Mr. Ellington's corporate credit card, the one designated for unforeseen expenditures and impossible to trace back to her personally. The entire transaction took less than 60 seconds. The booking confirmation flashed silently on the screen. The plan was set. Aisha pocketed the phone, took Jilly's cold hand once more, and looked directly at Alara. "We're leaving," she stated simply. She led her daughter past the frozen figure of Alara and out of the cold, stifling cell. Alara did not physically move, only following them with a gaze that was a volatile mixture of venom and total bewilderment. She still fundamentally failed to grasp what was happening. She had lost, but the comprehension of her defeat had not yet registered. They descended the service stairs and passed through the same huge, soulless foyer. Aisha grabbed her abandoned suitcase from the porch. Miraculously, the taxi was still idling discreetly near the gate. Aisha asked the driver to wait, though a practical part of her mind already suspected things would not go smoothly according to plan. The driver watched with barely concealed curiosity as Aisha helped the strange, frightened girl, now wrapped in an incongruously expensive coat, into the spacious back seat. The car pulled away, and the stately, formidable Thorne mansion began to shrink rapidly in the rearview mirror. Jilly sat huddled beside her mother, still shaking. She was not looking at Aisha, but staring fixedly into the empty space directly ahead of her. "Mom, you don't understand," Jilly finally whispered, her voice ringing with the terror that had become her constant companion. "My phone. Trent tracks it. He always knows exactly where I am. He'll find us." Aisha looked calmly at her daughter, then at the small, cheap smartphone Jilly was gripping tightly. It wasn't a communication tool. It was a leash, an electronic collar that bound her to her captors. Aisha gently took the phone from Jilly's weakened fingers. Jilly did not resist at all. Without a word, Aisha pressed the power window button. The cold November air rushed violently into the cabin. The car was just leaving the quiet residential road, merging onto the roaring highway. Without an instant of hesitation, Aisha simply threw the phone out the dark window. It flashed briefly, a dying star, and disappeared into the night, instantly swallowed by the roar of passing trucks and cars. Jilly gasped sharply, looking at her mother with wide, stunned eyes. "He can track that," Aisha said, her voice utterly calm as she pressed the button to close the window. "He won't be able to track us." The silence inside the cabin became thick, almost physically palpable, broken only by the hiss of the tires on the wet asphalt. Jilly didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead. Her motionless, vacant gaze, devoid of tears but filled with shock, was more terrifying to Aisha than any violent sobbing. At the hotel, a doorman in a crisp, dark livery suit instantly opened the door for them. At the front desk, Aisha offered the name Anna Wolski, and a young woman with a professionally flawless smile handed her the keycard, asking no questions. In this specific world, the sphere of immense wealth and impeccable quiet service, anonymity was considered as standard a service as a clean towel. Their suite was located on the 23rd floor. Huge, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of nighttime Manhattan, intricately crisscrossed by the bright lines of car headlights. The room smelled warmly of expensive perfume and fresh, subtly exotic flowers. Aisha led Jilly into the massive, luxurious bedroom, where a pristine white duvet covered the enormous bed. She sat her down gently on the edge. Jilly was still light as a feather. "I'm going to run you a bath," Aisha said quietly. While the water softly filled the deep marble tub, Aisha used the phone to order a light, easily digestible dinner. Simple chicken broth, fresh-baked bread, and herbal tea. Simple restorative things. Then she pulled a new, still-packaged phone and a new SIM card from her suitcase. She had purchased them discreetly at the airport. The old U.S. number was now irrelevant. She activated the new line, transferred a few crucial contacts from her encrypted cloud storage, and placed it on the sleek writing desk. This was not a phone. This was her new primary tool. When Jilly finally emerged from the steam-filled bathroom, she was wrapped in a huge plush terry cloth robe. She looked even more fragile and delicate. The residual steam had softened the sharp angles of her facial features, but it could not erase the visible imprint of long, sustained suffering. Aisha helped her into a comfortable armchair positioned by the window and pulled the small table, laden with food, closer. Jilly picked up the spoon, but immediately placed it back down. And then she broke. Words poured out of her in a chaotic, stumbling torrent. It wasn't a narrative, it was a confession. Something. She must have meticulously rehearsed 1,000 times during her solitary confinement in the cold attic closet. She began with the deceptive fairy tale. Trent was initially so utterly charming, so overly generous. Flowers, extravagant dinners, passionate promises of eternal, sweeping love. The society wedding that had even made the local glossy papers. Her intense pride that she, a simple girl, had managed to marry into such a prominent, esteemed family. Then came the calculated isolation, slow and systematic. First, Alara Thorne had gently suggested that Jilly's college friends were not of their circle. Next, Trent began checking her phone, just joking, of course, to protect you from silly mistakes. Calls back home to Aisha became increasingly brief and were always conducted under the watchful supervision of either Trent or Alara. The emails she sent to her mother were written under explicit dictation. Then came the Thorne family rules. She had to be the first one awake, meticulously managing breakfast for the household. Her choice of clothing was brutally critiqued. Her opinion on any subject was instantly ridiculed as the naive ramblings of a commoner. Slowly, methodically, day by agonizing day, they stripped her of her very self, deliberately transforming her into a voiceless shadow. The final turn came when Trent approached her, his face carefully crafted into an expression of fright. He spoke of debts, huge, terrifying existential debts that threatened to ruin the Thorne family's pristine reputation. And she, as his loyal, devoted wife, had a solemn duty to help. The help initially involved doing a little work around the house, since Alara claimed she had been forced to fire some of the staff to save money. That little work swiftly mutated into punishing, round-the-clock servitude. She scrubbed their endless floors, polished their heirloom silver, and managed all the laundry. When she eventually cried from sheer exhaustion, Trent grew violently angry, calling her spoiled and ungrateful. That was the precise moment he first grabbed her arm, very hard. He told her to pull herself together. Bruises quickly became a routine part of her existence. She was forced to work off his fabricated debts. She was no longer a wife. She was property, collateral, slowly losing its value. At that very moment, in the cold, fortress-like mansion in Greenwich, Trent Thorne was pouring himself a generous measure of expensive, smoky single-malt whiskey into a wide crystal glass. Ice cubes clinked sharply against the heavy crystal. "The cleaning lady is back," he sneered, his teeth gritted, watching his mother, Alara, pace the cavernous living room. "Who in God's name does she think she is? She doesn't have a dime to her name. Everything she sent us over the years, we've long since spent." He took a large, resentful gulp of the liquor. "She took Jillian," Alara cut in, her voice unnaturally flat, her face expressionless. "So what?" Trent dismissed the problem with a careless wave of his hand. "They'll be on the street in a week. Jillian is weak. She's terrified of the real world. She'll crawl back here before the first heavy snow, begging for forgiveness in a warm bed." Alara stopped pacing and picked up her phone from a pristine antique table. She paused, tapping Jillian's usual mobile number. Long, insistent rings were followed by the automated, soulless voice of the operator. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is unavailable." Alara hung up slowly. That was unexpected. She retrieved an old, leather-bound address book and found another number, Aisha's. My new, sterile phone on the desk in the St. Regis suite vibrated sharply. Unknown number. Aisha knew exactly who it was. She looked at Jilly, who had finally fallen silent, huddled exhaustedly in the armchair. Aisha motioned for her to remain quiet. Then she answered the call and deliberately put it on speaker. "Aisha Washington," Alara's icy voice stated, skipping all social preamble. "You have exactly 24 hours to return my son's wife. Otherwise, I will file a report for kidnapping." Aisha paused, allowing the arrogant threat to hang fully in the luxurious air of the suite, giving it enough time to fully expose its emptiness and lose all potential power. "And I will file a report for felony assault," Aisha replied in an even, utterly colorless voice. "I possess 32 photographs of the bruises covering my daughter's body taken 1 hour ago. Every single image is time-stamped and notarized. Send your next message to my attorney." Aisha disconnected the call. Silence instantly enveloped the hotel room. Miles away in Greenwich, Trent and Alara stared at each other in utter, paralyzed confusion. A cleaner, a simple immigrant staff member, suddenly had an attorney? Where would she possibly find the funds or the nerve to retain an attorney? Their deep-seated certainty in their own social omnipotence had cracked for the very first time. Aisha placed the phone back on the writing table. Jilly was looking at her mother as if she were seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time in years. In Jilly's terrified eyes, for the first time during this terrible, endless evening, something other than terror finally gleamed, a tiny, weak, but unmistakable spark of hope. That nascent spark, Aisha realized, gave Jilly the required strength to articulate the one thing that was scarier than the beatings and the humiliation. She swallowed hard. Her voice dropped to a barely audible, wretched whisper. "Mom, the apartment. The one you bought me in Brooklyn. It's gone." Jilly's breath hitched. "Trent said we had to sell it immediately to pay off his debts. He made me sign papers over to his mother, Alara." These words did not cause a fresh wave of maternal grief in Aisha. The pain had long ago completed its transformation into that cold, dense stone anchored in her stomach. Now, that emotional weight became her ballast, her anchor. It successfully prevented her human emotions from overwhelming her professional capacity. Instead, an absolute ringing silence fell over her acute mind. In that profound silence, a different, colder mechanism engaged. This was no longer a subjective family drama or a personal tragedy. It was verifiable financial fraud. The emotional mother instantly gave way to the sharp, ruthless executive, the same manager who, for 15 years, had calmly juggled multi-million-dollar assets, complex international tax filings, and secretive offshore accounts. The condo, which Aisha had bought specifically with the money earned from her years of sleepless, demanding labor, was not merely a sentimental home for her daughter. It was a tangible asset, and that specific asset had been illegally, methodically misappropriated. Aisha tucked Jilly into the massive bed, gave her warm tea laced with honey, and waited patiently until her breathing deepened and stabilized. Jilly fell asleep almost instantly, utterly exhausted by the physical and emotional trauma. Aisha then moved to the writing desk, opened her laptop, and the glittering night view of Manhattan became merely the professional backdrop for her work. First, she found her, Ms. Regina Stone. In Manhattan legal circles, she was known simply as the shark in a skirt. Her specialization was razor-focused: corporate disputes, complicated fraud, and rapid, aggressive asset recovery. She was known to be expensive, ruthless, and therefore the perfect candidate. Aisha composed a short, clear, and utterly professional email with the subject line, "Urgent consultation, confidential." She attached scans of her valid Swiss passport and her official employment contract with Mr. Ellington, ensuring Ms. Stone would immediately understand she was not dealing with an irrational crackpot. Second was a critical early morning call to Geneva. She contacted Monsieur Girard, her trusted source. Girard was a former Swiss financial intelligence officer who now owned an elite, discreet consulting agency. Aisha woke him up. He was distinctly displeased until she uttered the critical phrase, "I need the best financial auditor in New York City, a specialist in tracking hidden assets and identifying offshore schemes." Exactly 20 minutes later, the detailed resume and private number of a man named Mr. Samuel Hayes appeared in her inbox. The core team was assembled. Now Aisha needed to gather irrefutable, contextual evidence. Aisha knew precisely where to start. The next morning, leaving Jilly safely under the care of the hotel concierge, who, at Aisha's request, assigned a discreet security guard to the room, disguised professionally as a personal assistant, Aisha drove back to her old address in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Her target was Mrs. Patty Jenkins, her former neighbor. Patty was the woman who had spent years sending Aisha saccharine, sickening emails full of relentless assurances that Jilly was just wonderful, that the Thorns were amazing, decent people, and who regularly received small sums of money from Aisha for perceived minor repairs to the condo and gifts for Jilly. Patty opened the apartment door and gasped loudly. Her face displayed a poorly acted, almost theatrical mixture of surprise and exaggerated joy. "Aisha, honey, what in the world brings you here? You're back. Why didn't you call first?" She fussed anxiously, dragging Aisha into her small, terribly cluttered apartment that smelled oppressively of stale mothballs and accumulated dust. "Oh, I am just so glad. And Jilly will be absolutely thrilled. She misses you so much. She and Trent are such a marvelous couple, such a couple. And his family, the Thorns, people of the very highest caliber." Patty babbled nonstop, her voice escalating slightly. The more she spoke, the more pronounced Aisha saw her transparent fear. Patty's eyes darted frantically around the room. Her hands nervously twisted the edge of her dirty apron. She was lying desperately, and very unskillfully. Aisha sat stiffly on the lumpy couch, pressing the palm of one hand to her forehead. "My head is pounding from the long travel, Patty. Probably my blood pressure is spiking. Could you please, just please, bring me a glass of cold water?" "Of course, Aisha, of course, right away." Patty instantly rushed toward the kitchen, relieved to have a task. The moment the sound of running water reached her ears, Aisha acted. Her movements were practiced, quick and precise. From the inside pocket of her coat, she pulled out a tiny object. A high-quality voice recorder, no larger than her thumbnail. It was a functional gift from Mr. Ellington's high-level security detail. It was voice-activated and could run autonomously for nearly a week. With a single, swift movement, she slid the small device deep under the couch cushion, forcing it into the narrow, dusty gap between the backrest and the seat. When Patty returned with the glass of water, Aisha was already sitting in the exact same pose. She drank the water slowly, thanked Patty graciously, blamed her sudden fatigue, and quickly left, promising to call as soon as she was settled. Patty walked her all the way to the elevator, continuing to heap effusive, meaningless compliments upon the Thorns. Aisha knew with chilling certainty that the moment the elevator doors closed behind her, Patty would rush back inside and grab her phone. Returning to the hotel, Aisha found Jilly still peacefully asleep. She quietly sat down in the armchair with her laptop to check her email. The reply from Ms. Stone was already there, scheduling an initial meeting for the following afternoon. Just then, a new notification popped up. It was an anonymous, encrypted email address. There was no subject line, no recognizable signature, just a few short lines of dense, horrifying text. "They are lying. It's not about Trent's debts." That was cover. Alara is liquidating all assets and consolidating funds. They plan to move to Cyprus in 72 hours. Jillian was the final price to clear Trent's name, and Alara signed over his share of the inheritance to him. Check the safe in the basement office. Aisha reread the message, again, and a third time. The letters formed words, and the words formed a monstrous, blood-curdling picture. The coldness that had been a dense stone in her gut instantly spread through her veins, freezing her blood solid. This was not merely cruelty or humiliation. This was a cold-blooded, meticulously calculated financial plan. The constant psychological warfare, the daily humiliation, the ugly bruises, all of it had been a calculated distraction, a smokescreen, while they were ruthlessly cashing out their entire lives here to begin a new one overseas. Aisha realized her sudden, unexpected arrival didn't just catch them off guard. It had violently shredded their carefully established schedule. It pulled the trigger on their frantic escape plan. 72 hours. The phrase pulsed on the laptop screen, instantly transforming from simple text into a horrifying metronome counting down to a complete catastrophe. She closed the lid of the laptop. There was absolutely no room left for emotion, no room for fear. There was only time, which was rapidly draining away, and there was the plan, which needed to be executed immediately. The very next day, Aisha drove back to Patty Jenkins's apartment. The pretext was deliberately simple and banal. She called Patty from her new number, profusely apologizing that she seemed to have dropped an expensive glove, made of very fine Italian leather, during her rushed visit the day before. "It was a gift, Patty, a very sentimental one," Aisha emphasized. "Oh, Aisha, of course, darling," Patty chirped anxiously on the other end of the line. "Come right over. We'll look for it together. I just started baking a pie." Her voice was even sweeter and more cloying than it had been yesterday. She already knew Aisha had spoken with Alara, and now she was playing her calculated part with renewed, desperate fervor. When Aisha entered the apartment, the smell of baking pie mingled sickly with the familiar scent of dust and fear. Patty led her into the small living room, and they both began a dramatic, false search of the floor around the couch. "What a pity," Aisha sighed loudly, kneeling near the furniture. They were practically brand new. "Maybe it rolled under the couch?" Patty offered readily, eager to direct the search. That was precisely what Aisha had needed. While Patty grunted and tried to peer under the low furniture from one side, Aisha pretended to search diligently from the other. Her hand slipped under the large cushion. Her fingers immediately found the tiny, cold rectangle of the voice recorder. She clenched it tightly in her palm. At the very same moment, she found the expensive glove, which had been resting safely in her own pocket all along. "Ah, there it is!" Aisha exclaimed with expertly feigned relief. "It must have slipped behind the back leg. Thank you, Patty. You really saved me." She didn't stay for the pie, claiming a sudden, urgent business meeting. She saw the poorly concealed relief in Patty's darting eyes. In the taxi on the return trip to the hotel, Aisha retrieved the recorder and put in her small, custom-made headphones. Inserting one into her ear, she pressed play. First, soft static, then a slight rustle. Patty had clearly sat down heavily on the couch, followed by the sharp sound of dialing, and then her instantly changed, businesslike voice, abruptly stripped of all the cloying sweetness. "Alara Thorne, this is Patty. She was just here." On the other end of the line, Alara's sharp, impatient voice was clearly audible. "And? Does she know anything substantial?" "No. No, I'm certain she doesn't," Patty replied confidently, a trace of greedy satisfaction in her voice. "I told her how deliriously happy Jilly is, how wonderfully you're taking care of her. She believed me, I could tell. She looks like a driven, exhausted horse, of course, but she definitely doesn't have the brains to figure anything out." A slight pause followed. Patty's voice abruptly became wheedling and eager. "Alara, about this month's payment, yes, I saw it. Thank you so much. It all came through immediately. You'll leave, and she won't even have time to catch her breath. Good luck to you over there in Cyprus." The short recording ended. Aisha sat in the taxi, watching the passing streets of Manhattan, feeling nothing but a relentless, icy calm. This wasn't merely betrayal from a neighbor. It was a carefully structured financial contract. Patty was not a deceived, well-meaning friend, but a highly paid accomplice. And now Aisha had direct, irrefutable proof of their explicit collusion. Before Aisha could put the phone away, it rang. The caller ID displayed, "Samuel Hayes, Auditor." "Aisha Washington, good afternoon." His voice was dry and entirely businesslike, sounding precisely like a stock market summary. "I've successfully completed the preliminary analysis as you requested. The information is confirmed. The apartment in Park Slope was officially sold 6 months ago." "To whom exactly?" Aisha asked, although she already knew the dark answer. "Nominally to a closed corporation, Vesta Capital," Hayes stated. "The company was registered precisely 3 days before the sale was recorded. It has one sole founder and CEO, Alara Thorne. And the money? The very same day, the entire sum from the sale, $3.5 million, was seamlessly transferred from Vesta Capital's bank account to Alara Thorne's personal account at Hellenic Bank Public Company, Limassol, Cyprus branch." Hayes concluded, "The scheme is completely transparent, for those of us who know precisely where to look." Aisha thanked him and hung up. The horrifying picture was clarifying by the minute. They weren't just psychologically tormenting her daughter. They were methodically, step by deliberate step, robbing both of them of absolutely everything. Jilly of her fundamental freedom and dignity, Aisha of her sole material asset, the financial fruit of 15 years of grueling labor. Aisha's arrival had truly only accelerated the finale of their vicious play. They had been forced to bring their well-laid escape plan out of the shadows. Aisha was already approaching the hotel entrance when the phone rang again. Regina Stone, attorney. "Aisha Washington." Stone's voice was sharp, utterly devoid of pleasantries. "I have obtained copies of the final transaction documents from the county clerk's office. I have news for you, and frankly, it now goes far beyond a typical family dispute or civil fraud." "I'm listening closely," Aisha said, stopping just before the revolving glass doors of the hotel. First, your daughter's signature on the purchase agreement is a crude, obvious forgery, Stone stated. It's not even an amateur attempt at imitating her handwriting. It's clearly a stamp. Your daughter most likely never even saw those papers, but that isn't the main problem you face. Her voice became even more serious. The steel notes had returned. Ilara didn't just sell the condo to herself via a shell company, Stone continued. She aggressively mortgaged it 3 days ago. She used the condo as collateral to secure a massive multi-million-dollar loan from Summit Trust Bank, a very large one. Apparently, she plans to deliberately default on the loan and flee immediately, sticking the bank with a highly illiquid asset tied up in complex litigation. This is no longer a civil case of simple fraud, Aisha. This is now a felony criminal offense in the realm of grand larceny. The attorney's words did not shock Aisha. They were the final, crucial puzzle piece that satisfyingly clicked into place, and the full, ugly picture presented itself to her mind. Aisha listened calmly, thanked Stone, and issued her next command. Regina, please call a car immediately. We're going to the Thorns' house. 40 minutes later, they were standing before the imposing, high, wrought iron gates again. But this time, Aisha did not feel like staff, nor did she feel like a victim. She was an auditor arriving for a highly unscheduled inspection. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, charcoal-colored pantsuit, expertly tailored on Rue du Rhône in Geneva. A pristine white silk blouse and an expensive, restrained Swiss watch adorned her wrist. This was her battle uniform, the unmistakable uniform of a professional problem solver. Regina Stone, a tall, fit woman with a cold, predatory glint in her eye, stood next to her, holding only a thin, legal leather briefcase. Aisha pressed the call button. The melodic chime sounded exactly the same as the first time, but today there was nothing magical or fairy tale about it. It was the clear, commanding signal for the commencement of battle. A full minute passed before the massive door finally opened. Ilara Thorne stood rigidly on the threshold. Seeing Aisha, she was not surprised. Her face was an impenetrable mask of pure ice and banked fury. "You are on private property," Ilara snapped immediately. "This is illegal trespassing." Aisha took a single, deliberate step forward, forcing Ilara to instinctively retreat backward into the vast, echoing foyer. "I've come for my asset," Aisha stated. Ilara's eyes narrowed instantly. At that moment, Trent Thorne appeared dramatically from behind his mother. He was wearing an expensive velvet dressing gown, but he looked thoroughly disheveled and dangerously angry. He stood blocking the wide doorway with his massive body. "Get out of our house!" he snarled, a low, guttural sound. "Jillian is not here, you peasant. She is my wife, and I am calling the police on you for kidnapping, old woman." "I didn't come for Jillian." Aisha's voice sliced cleanly through his aggressive tirade. It wasn't loud, but it was so purely icy that Trent stopped speaking mid-sentence. "I came for the $3.5 million from the illegal sale of my condo." For a split second, an absolute silence reigned in the marble foyer. Then Trent threw his head back and laughed. It was a coarse, self-confident laugh, radiating the profound certainty of a man convinced of his own total impunity. $3.5 million? Are you completely out of your mind, cleaning lady?" Trent sneered, stepping closer. "You have nothing. You are merely staff, just like your pathetic, worthless daughter. Get out before I call security and have you dragged off my property." Aisha ignored him completely. Her focus was solely on Ilara, who stood behind her son's shoulder, noticeably paler, but still trying desperately to maintain her composure. "I possess bank statements showing the direct transfer of funds from your dummy company, Vesta Capital, to your personal account in Limassol, Cyprus," Aisha said, articulating each word slowly and crystal clearly. "I have a notarized affidavit from Summit Trust Bank Security confirming your fraudulent loan acquisition attempt, and—" Aisha paused, deliberately shifting her gaze from Ilara's face to Trent's. I have a damning audio recording of your 4-minute conversation with Patty Jenkins, where you meticulously discuss the details of your conspiracy." Aisha watched the color instantly drain from Alara's face. She saw her hand twitch instinctively, as if blindly searching for stable support. "Your flight to Cyprus is scheduled for tonight at 10 p.m. from Newark," Aisha continued, maintaining the same flat, even tone. "And mine?" She glanced meaningfully at her Swiss watch. "Mine is whenever I choose." The arrogant, familiar smirk completely slid off Trent's face. He looked wildly from Aisha to his mother, a look of dull, bovine confusion filling his eyes. He did not understand the complex financial jargon, but he immediately grasped the stark, profound essence of the threat. And like any primitive, spoiled creature, he reacted to the threat with blind aggression. "You're lying, you wicked bitch!" he roared, lunging forward at Aisha, throwing his hand out to physically grab her. But he didn't reach her. "Stop, you absolute idiot!" A different voice, sharp, young, and entirely contemptuous, rang out suddenly from the top of the sweeping main staircase. All 4 people, Aisha, Regina Stone, Trent, and Alara, looked up immediately. Standing there was a young woman in her mid-20s whom Aisha had never seen before. She had dark hair cut into a choppy bob, a piercing, cynical gaze, and was dressed in a casual style that the aristocratic Alara likely considered utterly vulgar. In her hands, she held a thick, ledger-style book. It was Angela, Trent's younger sister, the one Jilly had mentioned only once, calling her quietly, the troubled one. Angela descended the marble stairs slowly, her heels clicking a precise, deliberate rhythm on the cold steps. "She's not lying, Trent," Angela said, stopping halfway down the stairs and looking at her brother with deep disgust. "And I was the one who gave her the account numbers." She then directed her cutting gaze toward her petrified mother. "Hello, Mom. I have a growing feeling you forged my signature on your business documents too, didn't you? Just like you did Jilly's." Angela's words dropped into the deafening silence of the foyer, like heavy stones into a frozen well. Trent froze entirely, his arm outstretched, his face a perfect picture of dull, bullish bewilderment. He stared blankly at his sister as if she were speaking an unknown alien language. All his performative aggression, all his slick, feigned authority instantly evaporated, leaving behind only a bewildered, utterly spoiled man in an expensive velvet robe. Aisha wasn't watching him. She was focused entirely on Alara. Aisha saw something profound and terrible die in Alara's eyes. Not hope. True hope had been absent in that woman for a long time. What died was her absolute last illusion of unshakable control. The calculated betrayal by the weak son she continually covered for was merely an irritating inconvenience to be managed. But the devastating betrayal by the daughter she had always despised, written off and dismissed as the troubled one, turned out to be the fatal, unexpected blow. It had originated from the place she least guarded. It violated every single one of her rigid notions of a world where the weak must quietly submit, and the troubled must remain silent in their assigned corner. Alara slowly, agonizingly slowly, turned her head toward her daughter. There was no visible fury in her gaze. There was something infinitely worse, a cold, definitive nullification, as if she were ruthlessly erasing her daughter's name from the very book of life. "You," she said quietly, but every single word resonated clearly in the dead silence, "are hereby disinherited. You are nothing to me." Angela gave a bitter, utterly joyless smile. "I've always been nothing to you, Mom, so I lose nothing of value." And then Alara turned back to face Aisha, and Aisha saw her change yet again. The cornered beast stopped thrashing wildly. It grew still, collecting itself, preparing for one final, decisive, desperate leap. The untouchable aristocrat vanished. Standing before Aisha now was a desperate marketplace hawker, ready to aggressively haggle over rotten goods. Her voice immediately lost its metallic, icy edge. It became wheedling, falsely intimate, almost conspiratorial. "This is all just a terrible misunderstanding," she began, taking a cautious step toward Aisha, moving around the frozen, statuesque figure of her son. "I can see you're a professional, a woman of serious business, Aisha. Let's be entirely reasonable." She stopped very close. Aisha could smell her heavy, expensive perfume. It no longer seemed like a symbol of supreme luxury, but merely a desperate attempt to mask the deeper smell of decay. "How much?" Alara asked in a near whisper, her voice suddenly cracked and low. $10 million? 20? Name your price, any price you can imagine. We'll give you the money right now, immediately. You hand over that ridiculous recording and all your papers, and we will leave this place." She glanced briefly away, toward the spot where Jilly had been kneeling hours earlier. "Your daughter, she's fundamentally not worth anything, Aisha. She's weak, she's worthless. This money, this is truly the best deal of her life, and yours." This final offer was Alara's last and greatest miscalculation. She had never understood who she was dealing with. She believed she was speaking to someone exactly like herself, someone for whom everything human had a quantifiable price tag, someone for whom a daughter was merely an asset to be profitably sold or simply written off as unnecessary waste. And then Aisha smiled. She felt the corners of her lips turn upward on their own, but there wasn't a single ounce of warmth in that expression. It was the cold, surgical smile of a doctor reporting that a massive tumor is inoperable. The smile of a judge reading the final, damning verdict. Judging by the way Alara's face violently twitched, she felt the full weight of it. "I am not a cleaning lady, Alara Thorne," Aisha said quietly and distinctly. "For the last 15 years, I professionally managed a fortune of $55 million in Geneva. I know exactly what the massive risk of flight means, and I know very well how the financial police and international law enforcement operate in any major country in the world." She paused, allowing the brutal truth to penetrate Ilara's collapsing reality. Ilara's entire world, built exclusively on rigid class superiority and financial arrogance, utterly collapsed in that second. Aisha saw it clearly in her widening pupils. "My price," Aisha looked her straight in the eye, boring into the very soul of her petty, greedy nature, "is everything." As Aisha spoke, Regina Stone, her lawyer, who had stood silently behind her, unmoving as a shadow, finished a short, rapid phone call. Stone looked up at Aisha and gave a barely noticeable confirming nod. The signal had been received, and at that very moment the tense silence was violently shattered by the loud, demanding ring of the intercom at the high gate. Alara flinched sharply and instinctively turned toward the sound. In her frantic mind, the escape plan to Cyprus was clearly still operational. For her, that sudden call could only mean one thing. "The cab!" she shrieked, her voice cracking desperately. "Where is that lazy girl? Why isn't anyone opening the gate?" She rushed wildly to the control panel mounted on the wall, pressing the buttons with visibly trembling fingers. The wrought iron gate slowly rolled open, revealing the entrance. But it was not a cab. After a few tense seconds, 4 people entered the foyer. 2 were in plain, sharp, dark suits with completely expressionless faces, and 2 were in official police uniforms, who remained standing formally by the entrance. One of the men in suits, a tall, gray-haired man, stepped forward deliberately and presented his badge. "Special Agent Davis, Financial Crimes Task Force. Alara Thorne, Trent Thorne," the agent stated monotonously. Alara stood silent, staring at him as if he were an unexpected, impossible ghost. Trent mumbled something weak and unintelligible. "You are being detained on suspicion of committing grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, and illegal transfer of assets outside the United States," the agent recited. "I need you to present your passports immediately." Passports. The final, sealing nail in their coffin. their eagerly anticipated ticket to freedom, which had instantly become merely damaging evidence. Their escape was over before it had even truly begun. They were crushed, annihilated, right there in their opulent foyer. The second officer approached Trent. Trent didn't even attempt to resist or flee. He simply stood there, his arms lowered in defeat, until the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly onto his wrists, clashing hideously with the soft velvet of his dressing gown. No one physically touched Alara. She remained motionless, rigid, like a marble statue. Only her deathly, frightening pallor revealed that she was still conscious and alive. She stared blankly into one spot, through Aisha, through the cold marble walls, and through the complete wreckage of her entire collapsed life. As Trent was being escorted rapidly toward the exit, he seemed to suddenly awaken from his shock. Passing the open front door, he saw the car parked waiting at the gate, the one Aisha and Stone had arrived in, and he saw exactly who was sitting safely in the back seat. Jillian. She sat there, still wrapped in Aisha's expensive coat, fragile but noticeably straight. Aisha had asked her to come. She had told Jilly that she needed to see this moment, not their humiliation, but the moment of her own profound liberation. Seeing her, Trent roared. It was a primal cry of impotent, caged, animalistic rage. All his polished veneer, all his slick, fake self-assurance fell away entirely, exposing his true, petty, and deeply malicious essence. "It's you! You set this all up, you scheming bitch!" he yelled, violently struggling against his escorts. "You won't get anything, do you hear me? Nothing! You're still my wife, you stupid cow!" He continued to scream curses and meaningless threats until he was physically shoved roughly into the waiting, unmarked car. And then Regina Stone took a deliberate step forward. She addressed neither Aisha nor the arresting officers. She spoke directly to Trent's retreating back. Her calm, legally precise voice rang out in the sudden ensuing silence louder than any scream could have. "Actually, Mr. Thorne," she announced, her voice like honed steel, "a lawsuit for the official dissolution of the marriage was filed this morning on the grounds of fraud, financial misconduct, and cruel and unusual punishment. Your marriage is deemed void from the very moment the papers were signed, which means, legally, she gets everything." The attorney's final words were not a harsh shot fired. They were the satisfying click of a heavy lock, decisively sealing the door to the violent, painful past. Aisha stood quietly in the cold marble foyer amid the fresh wreckage of another life. She felt neither schadenfreude nor even profound satisfaction. She felt only silence. The absolute, deep silence that finally settles after a long, exhausting, devastating storm has passed fully through. 6 months later, the air in Aisha's vast corner office on the 40th floor smells faintly of freshly brewed coffee and rich lemon wood polish. From the massive panoramic window of the Manhattan high-rise, she can clearly see the entirety of New York, bustling, corporate, and living ruthlessly by its own complex rules. Rules that Aisha has now learned not only to fundamentally understand, but to effectively use. On the glass door, the name, Washington and Partners, Asset and Private Wealth Management, is elegantly etched in frosted silver. Her formidable skills, honed over 15 years in the unforgiving financial climate of Geneva, are finally, truly working for her. "No, Mr. Ellington," Aisha says smoothly into her wireless headset, reviewing a complex chart of asset returns on her computer screen. "We cannot possibly invest in that startup. The risk assessment is far too high. Their current business model simply isn't viable long term. I will send you a detailed, comprehensive report in 1 hour." She switches the line seamlessly to answer an immediate call from Berlin. Her tone instantly sharpens, and her phrases become shorter and more decisive as she explains to the caller that the terms of their proposed credit line are unacceptable and that Washington and Partners will be seriously considering their competitor's offer instead. This is followed by a brief, crisp call with a London solicitor, discussing the minute details of establishing an encrypted trust fund for a new, immensely wealthy client. Finishing the conversation, Aisha leans back into her comfortable chair and closes her eyes for just a moment. Silence. Not the dead, heavy silence of the Thorne mansion, but a living silence, filled with the constant, distant hum of the massive city and the private, profound satisfaction of a difficult job, meticulously well done. Her gaze falls finally on a thin manila folder resting at the edge of the table. A neat label on it reads, Case number 734, Thorns. All of their assets are permanently frozen. Alara and Trent are currently awaiting trial in a detention facility. The accumulated evidence against them is absolutely irrefutable. Testimony from bank officials, critical financial documents provided to the investigation by Angela, and crucially, the full, detailed confession of Patty Jenkins, who struck a plea deal in exchange for probation. Patty turned out to be petty, greedy, and easily cowed, like most people who commit sustained evil out of a mixture of fear and naked avarice. The Park Slope condo is hers again. Or rather, Jilly's and hers. The notarized deeds are secured safely in her vault. Every single document, every record, painstakingly gathered in that folder, is a brick. A brick in the massive, impenetrable wall she has successfully built between her daughter and her brutal past. Aisha checks her watch. It's time. The most important meeting of the entire day. She is not driving home to her own elegant apartment. Her car turns off the noisy, crowded highway onto a quiet country road that winds gracefully through a dense pine forest. The air here is profoundly different. It smells deeply of sharp pine needles, rich, damp earth, and immediate, overwhelming peace. Tranquility Harbor, the sign reads. The rehabilitation center is not a hospital. It is more like a highly exclusive country club designed specifically for those whose soul desperately needs rest and gentle rebuilding. Small, cozy cottages, a perfectly manicured park, elaborate greenhouses, and a complete, deliberate absence of all hustle and urgency. Aisha finds her in the protected garden near a row of meticulously kept rose bushes. Jilly is kneeling on a special soft mat, working carefully in the soil. She wears simple linen pants and a light plain t-shirt. Her hair is cut short now, and it suits her surprisingly well, revealing her delicate neck and a newly stubborn set to her jawline. She is still very thin, but the sickly, gaunt thinness of starvation is gone. And most importantly, her eyes. They are clear, calm, and present. The hunted, frantic terror is completely absent. She smiles genuinely when she sees Aisha and waves a hand lightly stained with dark earth. "Mom, look, this is a Pierre de Ronsard rose," Jilly says, her voice low and focused. "The agronomist showed me exactly how to plant it correctly. The root collar needs to be precisely level with the soil surface." Aisha sits down quietly on the nearby bench, watching Jilly's focused, smooth movements. She works the soil meticulously but confidently, as if conducting a quiet, respectful dialogue with the fragile plant. For 15 long years, Aisha sent Jilly money so she could wear designer dresses and eat at expensive restaurants. Yet, profound happiness, it turns out, was found here, in the simple, quiet ability to bring a new flower to vibrant life with her own two hands. They sit in silence for a long time. There is no awkwardness in this silence. It is comfortable, warm, like an old, trusted blanket. "I got an email from Angela last week," Jilly says suddenly, not looking up from the soil. Her voice is quiet, measured, and even. "She enrolled in art school in Paris. She wrote that she had always secretly dreamed of it." Jilly pauses, gently tamping the soil around the seedling with precise care. "She asked me to tell both you and me that she is very, very sorry for everything." Aisha doesn't respond verbally, just nods slightly. She doesn't ask if reading the email hurt Jilly. She doesn't ask if she still wakes up screaming from nightmares. Aisha knows intrinsically that the wounds of Jilly's soul haven't yet fully healed. but they are finally no longer bleeding uncontrollably. She will not probe them with misplaced, unneeded questions. Her most crucial job now is not to actively save her, but simply to be utterly present. To just sit on this quiet bench under the warm spring sun and breathe this clean, peaceful air with her. Jilly finishes her quiet work, stands up, and sits down right next to Aisha. Her hands smell faintly of rich earth and soft roses. She gently rests her head on her mother's shoulder, and Aisha wraps her arm carefully around her. Aisha looks at the young, newly planted rose bush. It seems incredibly fragile, almost ephemeral, but Aisha knows that a great enduring strength is hidden deep within it. It will put down deep roots, it will grow stronger, and one day it will inevitably blossom with heavy, lush, triumphant flowers. The day Aisha walked into the thorn house, she had been convinced that her solitary mission was simply to save her daughter, to physically rip her from captivity. But she was wrong. Her liberation was not a simple escape. It was a decisive counterattack. She didn't just pull Jilly from the ruins of her life. She meticulously tore down the entire world that had caused her daughter such agonizing pain. And in its collapsed place, brick by careful brick, using her mind, her honed experience, and her unyielding will, Aisha Washington had successfully built a new world for both of them. A safe, calm, and prosperous world where they can finally sit quietly on a bench together and simply watch the roses grow. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.